Background of the author. Samuel Beckett was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1906 and died in Paris, France in 1989. He studied at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, and while he was studying there, he became fluent in French. During the 1920s, he wrote novels and plays in both English and French, and he usually served as his own translator. He didn't really use a dictionary that much, therefore he translated his novels and plays in the way he interpreted them. Beckett later worked as a French teacher at Trinity College, and he also became a messenger for the French resistance during World War II. Throughout most of his life, however, he suffered through a great amount of depression, and his main goal was to stay sane. As a result, he remained secluded and intensely private for the majority of his life. He did travel to America and other parts of Europe every now and again, but for the most part, he was lonely and all by himself. Beckett's most famous work was created in 1952, and it was called Waiting for Godot. Some of his other major works include the trilogy of novels Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnamable. One of his most famous plays was Endgame, which was created in 1957. Beckett is also known for his short forms of expression. He was able to compress his works into shorter forms of literature, which became a new kind of dramatic prose poetry during the modern period. Because of this new style of literature, Beckett was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969. Relation to the modern period. Beckett's style of literature was a major part in the literary movement known as the theater of the absurd. The attitudes portrayed in this movement were that there was no meaning or purpose to the life and actions of human beings, bewilderment and confusion about the daily lives of people, and the works typically go against normal logic and what people usually expect in a story, poem, or play. The ideas of the theater of the absurd came from the issues of the post-World War II era. After the horrors of World War II, the only possible way of living seemed to be a mixture of despair and humor. After decades of dealing with huge social issues such as poverty, war, fascism, and the Holocaust, writers turned inward to private, personal, familial, and everyday situations. Many writers believed that the old structures of dramatic expression were no longer useful forms for a play. After centuries of manipulating language and style, writers began to mistrust language itself and its ability to communicate. Literary elements found in Endgame. One of the elements found in Endgame is irony. It is first seen when Clove says his legs hurt, but he is unable to sit down. Throughout the play, Clove feels an unbelievable amount of pain in both of his legs, and Ham tells him to sit down. However, Clove says that he cannot sit down simply because he cannot sit and all he can do is stand up. Irony is also seen in the play when Clove repeatedly says he will leave Ham, but Clove never actually leaves him. In the play, Clove is badly treated by Ham, and he acts as a sort of slave or servant towards Ham. So Clove makes multiple attempts to get away from Ham. However, no matter how many times Clove tries to get away from Ham, they always stay together. For example, Ham says that everyone wants Clove to leave, including his parents. So Clove decides that he will leave, but Ham instantly says that he can't leave him. So Clove changes his mind right away. Another example is when Ham tells Clove to make a raft for him so he can never see Clove again. But Ham's fear of sharks causes him to change his mind right away. Through their compassion and odd attitudes, it seems that Clove and Ham do not want to be separated, or they cannot be separated. Satire is also seen in the play. The satire in Endgame is that humans are unable to make good decisions and talk to each other about the same topic for a long period of time. Beckett shows that humans aren't able to communicate properly, and people have odd ways of speaking to each other. This relates to the theater of the absurd idea that humans live in despair and humor because although people feel miserable in their daily lives, they use witty remarks and comical language to try to make their lives more interesting. There are also similes that are used in Endgame. The first one is when Nell says, "Yes, it's like the funny story we have heard too often. We still find it funny, but we don't laugh anymore." This quote compares funny stories we hear multiple times to when Clove is laughing about the man in Ham's story who wanted to become a gardener. This shows that sometimes people just laugh about something for no particular reason. We just assume and believe that some things are funny, even though it wasn't really meant to be funny. The second simile is when Ham says, "Then babble, babble, words, like the solitary child who turns himself into children, 2, 3, so as to be together and whisper together in the dark." This quote compares the actions of a single child to the actions of Ham if he was left all by himself. He would act like multiple children, sort of talking to himself as a way of feeling like someone is right by his side instead of feeling all alone. There was also a double entendre said by Ham when he says, "Lick your neighbor as yourself." This is a play on words from a sentence that is seen in the Gospels of Mark, Luke, Matthew, and John. The real meaning behind this quote is that people should love each other and should treat each other as if you were taking care of yourself. The sexual overtone, however, is seen when Ham says the word lick your neighbor instead of love your neighbor.
1. Silence. Where was I? It's finished. We're finished. Nearly finished. There will be no more speech. Something dripping in my head, ever since the fontanelles. Splash, splash, always on the same spot. Perhaps it's a little vein, a little artery. Enough of that. It's story time. Where was I? The man came crawling towards me, on his belly, pale, wonderfully pale, and thin. Beseemed on the point of... No, I've done that bit. I calmly filled my pipe. The mearchasm lit it with, let us say, a Vesta. Drew a few puffs. Ah. Well, what is it you want? It was an extraordinarily bitter day, I remember. 0 by the thermometer, but considering it was Christmas Eve, there was nothing extraordinary about that. Seasonable weather for once in a way. Well, what ill wind blows you my way? He raised his face to me, black with mingled dirt and tears. That should do it. No, no, don't look at me. Don't look at me. He dropped his eyes and mumbled something. Apologies, I presume. I'm a busy man, you know. The final touches, before the festivities. You know what it is. Come on now, what is the object of this invasion? It was a glorious bright day, I remember. 50 by the heliometer. But already the sun was sinking down into the... down among the dead. Nicely put, that. Come on now, come on. Present your petition and let me resume my labors. There's English for you. Ah, well. It was then he took the plunge. It's my little one, he said. Tss, a little one. That's bad. My little boy, he said, as if the sex mattered. Where did he come from? He named the whole. A good half day, on horse. What are you insinuating? That the place is still inhabited? No, no. Not a soul except himself and the child. Assuming he existed. Good. I inquired about the situation at Kaf. Beyond the gulf. Not a sinner. Good. And you expect me to believe you have left your little one back there? All alone? And alive into the bargain? Come now. It was a howling day, I remember. 100 by the anemometer. The wind was tearing up the dead pines and sweeping them away. A feeble bit, that. Come on, man, speak up. What is it you want from me? I have to put up my holly. Well, to make it short, it finally transpired that what he wanted from me was bread for this brat. Bread? But I have no bread. It doesn't agree with me. Good. Then perhaps a little corn. That should do it. Corn, yes. I have corn. It's true. In my granaries. But use your head. I give you some corn. A pound. A pound and a half. You bring it back to your child, and you make him, if he's still alive, a nice pot of porridge. A nice pot and a half of porridge. Full of nourishment. Good. The colors come back into his little cheeks, perhaps. And then? I lost patience. Use your head, can't you? Use your head. You're on Earth. There's no cure for that. It was an exceedingly dry day, I remember. 0 by the hygrometer. Ideal weather for my lumbago. But what in God's name do you imagine? That the earth will awaken the spring? That the rivers and seas will run with fish again? That there's manna in heaven still for imbeciles like you? Gradually, I cooled down sufficiently, at least to ask him how long he had taken on the way. 3 whole days. Good. In what condition had he left the child? Deep in sleep? But deep in what sleep? Deep in what sleep already? Well, to make it short, I finally offered to take him into my service. He had touched a chord, and then I imagined already that I wasn't much longer for this world. Well? Well? Here, if you were careful, you might die a nice natural death, in peace and comfort. Well, in the end, he asked me would I consent to take in the child as well, if he were still alive. It was the moment I was waiting for. Would I consent to take the child? I can see him still, down on his knees, his hands flat on the ground, glaring at me with his mad eyes in defiance of my wishes. I'll soon have finished with this story, unless I bring in other characters. But where would I find them? Where would I look for them? Let us pray to God.